Chapter 1. Ancient Lands and First Peoples, 10,000 BCE, 1524 CE. The story of New York begins not with Dutch merchants or English governors, but with ice. 20,000 years ago, glaciers a mile thick covered the land that would become the Empire State. As these ancient ice sheets retreated, they carved the Hudson River Valley, gouged out the Finger Lakes, and left behind a landscape of unparalleled geographic diversity. By 10,000 BCE, the first humans arrived, Paleo-Indian hunters tracking mastodons and caribou across a tundra slowly transforming into dense forest. These earliest New Yorkers left behind spear points and tool caches, silent testimony to their presence in a world that no longer exists. By 1000 BCE, the woodland period had begun, and the people of this land had developed sophisticated agricultural practices, cultivating the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, in fertile river valleys. Villages appeared along waterways. The Iroquois Confederacy, or Haudenosaunee, emerged as one of the most powerful and politically sophisticated indigenous nations in North America. Comprising the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca nations, later joined by the Tuscarora, the Confederacy developed a system of representative democracy that would later influence the framers of the United States Constitution. The Great Law of Peace, established by the prophet Daganawida and his spokesman Hiawatha, created a federation bound by wampum belts and governed by a grand council of 50 sachems. This was not primitive tribalism, but advanced statecraft, with checks and balances, impeachment procedures, and women's suffrage in selecting leaders. Along the Atlantic coast and Long Island, Algonquian-speaking peoples, the Lenape, Munsee, Wappinger, Montaukett, and Shinnecock, established fishing villages and seasonal hunting camps. They navigated coastal waters in dugout canoes, harvested oysters from bays so abundant that shells piled stories high, and traded furs and wampum along networks stretching from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic. The Lenape called their island home Mannahatta, Island of Many Hills, a forested paradise of streams and wildlife. These were not scattered bands but organized societies with complex kinship systems, diplomatic protocols, and deep spiritual connections to the land. The indigenous peoples of New York had been shaping this landscape for 12,000 years before European eyes first glimpsed its shores. They were not waiting for history to begin. They were history itself, living, breathing, building civilizations that would soon face an existential threat they could never have imagined. Chapter 2. European Contact and New Netherland, 1524–1664. In 1524, Giovanni da Verrazzano, sailing under the French flag, became the first European to enter New York Harbor. He described a land of great sweetness and native peoples eager to trade. But it was Henry Hudson, an English navigator employed by the Dutch East India Company, whose 1609 voyage up the river that now bears his name would alter history forever. Hudson was searching for the Northwest Passage to Asia. He found instead a river valley rich in beaver pelts, the soft gold that would fuel European interest for decades. The Dutch moved quickly. In 1614 they established Fort Nassau near present-day Albany, and in 1624 30 Walloon families, Protestant refugees from what is now Belgium, arrived aboard the ship New Nederland to establish New Netherland, a Dutch colonial province stretching from the Delaware River to Connecticut. The following year, the Dutch West India Company founded New Amsterdam on the southern tip of Manhattan Island. The legendary purchase of Manhattan from the Lenape for 60 guilders worth of goods, often mythologized as $24 in beads, was actually a more complex negotiation rooted in fundamentally different concepts of land ownership. To the Lenape, land could be shared but not owned. To the Dutch, a deed was permanent possession. New Amsterdam grew slowly but strategically. Director General Peter Stuyvesant, who arrived in 1647 with a wooden leg and an iron will, transformed the settlement from a rowdy trading post into a proper colonial capital. He paved streets, built a protective wall along what is now Wall Street, established a municipal government, and welcomed immigrants of diverse backgrounds. By the 1650s, New Amsterdam was the most ethnically diverse settlement in North America, with residents speaking 18 different languages. Sephardic Jews fleeing persecution in Brazil established the first Jewish community in North America. Africans, both enslaved and free, comprised nearly 20% of the population. This cosmopolitan character, born of commerce rather than ideology, would become New York's defining trait. But Dutch control was precarious. England coveted this strategic territory, wedged between its New England and Chesapeake colonies. In 1664, 4 English frigates sailed into New York Harbor. Stuyvesant wanted to fight, but his poorly armed colonists refused. Without firing a shot, New Netherland became English, renamed New York in honor of the Duke of York, brother to King Charles II. The Dutch briefly recaptured the colony in 1673, but the Treaty of Westminster permanently ceded it to England in 1674. Dutch place names, architectural styles, and cultural practices remained, creating a unique hybrid society. The patroon estates along the Hudson, feudal land grants to wealthy Dutchmen, would persist for 2 more centuries, breeding resentment that would explode in the anti-rent wars of the 1840s. Chapter 3. Colonial New York and Revolution, 1664–1783. Under English rule, New York became a royal colony with a governor appointed by the Crown and an elected assembly increasingly resistant to royal prerogative. The colony's strategic position made it a prize in every imperial conflict. During King William's War and Queen Anne's War, French and their indigenous allies raided frontier settlements with terrifying regularity. The Schenectady Massacre of 1690, in which French and indigenous forces killed 60 colonists and burned the village, traumatized the colony for generations. New York City emerged as a commercial powerhouse, its deep harbor making it the natural entrepot for trade with the Caribbean and Europe. Merchants grew wealthy on flour exports, shipbuilding, and increasingly enslaved labor. By 1740, New York City had the highest proportion of enslaved people of any northern city, with enslaved Africans constituting 20% of the population. The 1712 slave revolt, in which 24 enslaved people set fire to buildings and killed 9 whites before being captured and executed with spectacular brutality, revealed the violent tensions underlying colonial prosperity. The 1741 Negro plot, whether real conspiracy or paranoid fantasy, resulted in the execution of 34 people, both black and white, accused of planning to burn the city. The French and Indian War, 1754–1763, brought the British Empire to its zenith, but also planted the seeds of rebellion. New York's frontier became a battlefield. Fort William Henry fell to French forces in 1757. Fort Ticonderoga witnessed devastating losses. When Britain finally triumphed, colonists expected gratitude. Instead, they got the Stamp Act, the Quartering Act, and a demand to pay for their own defense. New York's merchants and artisans joined Boston's radicals in resisting parliamentary taxation. The Sons of Liberty, led by firebrand Isaac Sears and wealthy merchant Alexander McDougall, organized boycotts and intimidated Crown officials. The Continental Congress met in New York in 1765 to coordinate resistance to the Stamp Act. When fighting erupted in Massachusetts in 1775, New York faced an agonizing choice. The colony was deeply divided. Tenant farmers, artisans, and merchants leaned toward independence. Large landowners, Anglican clergy, and merchants dependent on British trade favored loyalty. In July 1776, the Declaration of Independence reached New York just as General George Washington prepared to defend the city against the largest expeditionary force Britain had ever assembled, 32,000 troops and 300 ships under General William Howe. The Battle of Long Island in August 1776 was a catastrophe for American arms. Howe outflanked Washington's defensive positions, inflicting 1,500 casualties and nearly capturing the entire Continental Army. Only a miraculous nighttime evacuation across the East River, covered by fog, and the Maryland 400's suicidal rearguard action saved the Revolution. Washington retreated up Manhattan, fighting desperate delaying actions at Harlem Heights and White Plains before abandoning New York City to 7 years of British occupation. But if New York City was lost, the Hudson Valley became the Revolution's crucial theater. The British strategy, cutting New England off from the other colonies by controlling the Hudson, seemed sound. In 1777, General John Burgoyne marched south from Canada, while Howe was supposed to march north from New York City. The plan collapsed. Howe sailed to Philadelphia instead. Burgoyne, harassed by militia and lacking supplies, surrendered his entire army at Saratoga in October 1777. This stunning American victory convinced France to enter the war as an ally, transforming a colonial rebellion into a global conflict. The war in New York became a vicious partisan struggle. Loyalist Rangers and indigenous allies raided Patriot settlements. The Cherry Valley Massacre of 1778, carried out by British Loyalists and Iroquois warriors under Joseph Brant, killed 30 settlers and sent shockwaves through the frontier. General John Sullivan's retaliatory expedition of 1779 systematically destroyed 40 Iroquois towns, burning crops and orchards in a scorched earth campaign that broke indigenous power in New York, but poisoned relationships for generations. The war's end in 1783 brought British evacuation from New York City. The last Redcoats departed on November 25th, a day celebrated as Evacuation Day for decades, but left a landscape scarred by 7 years of occupation, raids, and economic disruption. Chapter 4. The Empire State Rises, 1783–1865. The new nation faced west, and New York stood at the gateway. The 1784 Treaty of Fort Stanwix, in which Iroquois nations ceded most of their remaining lands, opened central and western New York to settlement. Land speculators bought up millions of acres. New England farmers, seeking better soil and opportunity, poured into the region, founding villages that replicated the white clapboard church and common green landscapes they'd left behind. By 1800, New York had displaced Virginia as the most populous state, a position it would hold for 150 years. But geography constrained growth. Moving goods over the Appalachian Mountains cost more than shipping them across the Atlantic. In 1817, Governor DeWitt Clinton launched the most ambitious public works project in American history, the Erie Canal, a 363-mile artificial river connecting the Hudson River to Lake Erie. Derided as Clinton's ditch by skeptics, the canal was an engineering marvel. 83 locks lifted boats 568 feet from the Hudson to Lake Erie. 18 aqueducts carried the canal over rivers and valleys. Irish immigrant laborers dug through swamps and blasted through rock, many dying of malaria and accidents. When the canal opened in October 1825, Clinton poured a barrel of Lake Erie water into New York Harbor in a Wedding of the Waters ceremony. The impact was instantaneous. Shipping costs dropped 90%. Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, and Utica mushroomed from villages to cities. Farm products from Ohio and Michigan flowed east. Manufactured goods and immigrants flowed west. New York City, controlling both ends of the canal, exploded in population and wealth, becoming America's undisputed commercial capital. The canal made New York the Empire State in economic fact, but it also made the state a crucible of social and religious experimentation. The burned-over district of western New York, so called because waves of religious revivals swept the region like wildfire, gave birth to new faiths and reform movements. Joseph Smith founded Mormonism in Palmyra in 1830 after claiming to receive golden plates from an angel. The Fox Sisters of Hydesville launched the spiritualism movement in 1848 with mysterious spirit rappings. The Oneida community practiced communal living and complex marriage under John Humphrey Noyes' perfectionist theology. The Second Great Awakening's fervor fed into reform movements, temperance, prison reform, women's rights, and most explosively, abolitionism. New York's relationship with slavery was deeply conflicted. The state had passed gradual emancipation in 1799, finally ending slavery completely in 1827, yet New York merchants financed Southern plantations, and New York textile mills processed Southern cotton. Still, abolitionism found powerful voices. Frederick Douglass published his North Star newspaper in Rochester. Harriet Tubman made her home in Auburn, organizing Underground Railroad rescues from there. Garrett Smith's wealth funded radical abolitionism, and John Brown planned his Harper's Ferry raid at Smith's estate. The 1848 Seneca Falls Convention, organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, launched the women's suffrage movement with a declaration of sentiments consciously modeled on the Declaration of Independence. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, New York was crucial to Union survival. The state provided more troops, over 400,000 men, than any other. New York regiments fought in every major battle, but the war exposed deep fissures. Many working-class New Yorkers, especially Irish immigrants competing with black workers for jobs, opposed the war and especially the draft. In July 1863, the New York City draft riots exploded into the worst civil insurrection in American history. For 4 days, mobs burned draft offices, attacked abolitionist newspapers, and lynched black New Yorkers in an orgy of racist violence. Federal troops rushed from Gettysburg, restored order, but only after at least 120 deaths. The riots revealed that even in the North, racial hatred could erupt with terrifying ferocity. Yet New York also produced heroes. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry, though officially a Massachusetts unit, recruited heavily from New York's black community. Clara Barton, born in Massachusetts but active in New York, pioneered battlefield nursing, and Walt Whitman, Brooklyn's poet, captured the war's anguish in drum taps and tended wounded soldiers in Washington hospitals. Chapter 21, Gilded Age and Progressive Era, 1865–1929. The war's end unleashed an explosion of industrialization, urbanization, and immigration that transformed New York beyond recognition. The state became America's manufacturing colossus. Rochester produced cameras and optics. Schenectady pioneered electrical equipment under General Electric. Buffalo's steel mills glowed day and night. New York City's garment district employed hundreds of thousands. Cornelius Vanderbilt unified competing railroads into the New York Central system, linking the Great Lakes to the Atlantic. Jay Gould, Jim Fisk, and other robber barons made and lost fortunes through stock manipulation and corporate raids. J.P. Morgan, operating from his Wall Street office, became the most powerful financier in the world, single-handedly stabilizing the American economy during the Panic of 1907. This wealth was built on immigrant labor. Between 1880 and 1920, 23 million immigrants entered America, most through New York Harbor. Castle Garden and later Ellis Island processed thousands daily. Italians, Jews, fleeing pogroms, Irish, Germans, Poles, Greeks, a human tide seeking opportunity and refuge. Emma Lazarus's 1883 poem, The New Colossus, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," inscribed on the Statue of Liberty's base in 1903, captured the ideal if not always the reality. Immigrants crowded into Lower East Side tenements, where Jacob Riis's photography in How the Other Half Lives exposed shocking poverty. They worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week, in unsafe conditions. The 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which killed 146 workers, mostly young Jewish and Italian women trapped behind locked doors, galvanized the labor movement and led to landmark workplace safety reforms. Labor organized to fight back. The American Federation of Labor, though headquartered elsewhere, drew much strength from New York's skilled workers. The International Ladies' Garment Workers Union led massive strikes. The 1909 uprising of $20,000, in which predominantly female garment workers walked off the job, showed that immigrant women could be militant unionists. Samuel Gompers, Mother Jones, and socialist leaders like Eugene V. Debs found receptive audiences in New York's working-class neighborhoods. Political machines, especially Tammany Hall, the democratic organization that controlled New York City politics, provided social services, jobs, and Christmas turkeys in exchange for votes. Boss Tweed's reign in the 1860s became synonymous with corruption. He and his associates stole millions. But Tammany also Americanized immigrants and gave them political voice. Reformers like Theodore Roosevelt, who served as New York City Police Commissioner and Governor before becoming president, battled corruption while enacting progressive reforms. The Progressive Era brought transformative change. The subway opened in 1904, revolutionizing urban transportation. Brooklyn Bridge, 1883, Manhattan Bridge, 1909, and Queensboro Bridge, 1909, stitched the city together. Skyscrapers climbed ever higher. The Flatiron Building, 1902, Woolworth Building, 1913, and finally the Chrysler Building, 1930, and Empire State Building, 1931. Each briefly the world's tallest. Women won the vote in New York in 1917, 3 years before the 19th Amendment. Prohibition, enacted in 1920, made New York a bootlegger's paradise. Speakeasies flourished while organized crime, led by figures like Arnold Rothstein and later Lucky Luciano, corrupted police and politicians. The 1920s brought both prosperity and profound cultural flowering. The Harlem Renaissance made New York the center of black artistic and intellectual life. Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and countless others created work of enduring genius. The Cotton Club and Savoy Ballroom brought black music to white audiences, though often under Jim Crow conditions. Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association, headquartered in Harlem, became the largest black mass movement in American history, preaching racial pride and Pan-Africanism. Meanwhile, the stock market soared to dizzying heights. Speculation became a national mania. Margin buying made paper fortunes. And then, on October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday, the market collapsed, wiping out fortunes and triggering the Great Depression. Noak, Chapter 6, Modern New York, Crisis, Renaissance, and the 21st Century, 1929-present. The Depression hit New York with devastating force. Breadlines stretched around blocks. Shantytowns called Hoovervilles appeared in Central Park. Unemployment reached 25%. Banks failed. Yet New York also led the recovery. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, the Little Flower, a Republican fusion candidate who defeated Tammany in 1933, modernized city government, while Robert Moses, the most powerful unelected official in American history, reshaped the metropolis. Moses built highways, bridges, beaches, and parks on an unprecedented scale. The Triborough Bridge, the West Side Highway, Jones Beach, the Bronx Whitestone Bridge. His projects enabled suburban sprawl but also destroyed neighborhoods, displaced communities, and prioritized cars over mass transit. His racism was institutional. He designed bridge overpasses too low for buses, effectively excluding poor and black New Yorkers from his beaches. World War II brought full employment and industrial might. Brooklyn Navy Yard built battleships. Buffalo's factories produced aircraft components. New York's financial power funded the Allied war effort. The United Nations, established in 1945 and headquartered in New York from 1952, made the city the world's diplomatic capital. Post-war prosperity fueled suburban migration. The GI Bill enabled white veterans to buy homes in Levittown and similar developments, while redlining and racial covenants excluded black families. Cities declined as whites fled. By the 1960s, urban crisis loomed. The 1960s and 1970s brought upheaval. The civil rights movement challenged Northern racism. Malcolm X preached black nationalism before his assassination in Harlem's Audubon Ballroom in 1965. The Stonewall riots of 1969, when patrons of a Greenwich Village gay bar fought back against a police raid, launched the modern LGBTQ rights movement. Anti-Vietnam War protests roiled college campuses. The 1968 Ocean Hill-Brownsville teachers' strike exposed tensions between Jewish teachers' unions and black community control advocates. Crime soared. The South Bronx burned, landlords torching buildings for insurance, neighborhoods collapsing into rubble. In 1975, New York City teetered on bankruptcy. When Mayor Abe Beame sought federal help, President Ford refused. The Daily News headline, "Ford to City, Drop Dead Bazzi," became iconic. The city survived through layoffs, service cuts, and a state rescue, but at tremendous cost. Recovery came slowly. Times Square's decay, a pornography and crime-ridden nightmare, symbolized urban failure. But starting in the 1980s, under mayors Ed Koch, David Dinkins, and especially Rudy Giuliani, crime fell dramatically. Controversial policing strategies, gentrification, and broader economic trends transformed the city. Times Square became a family-friendly tourist destination. Brooklyn neighborhoods once considered dangerous became hipster enclaves where artisanal coffee shops replaced bodegas. Wealth returned, but so did inequality. New York became both a billionaire's playground and home to vast homelessness. September 11, 2001, tested New York's resilience like nothing since the Civil War, when terrorists flew planes into the World Trade Center's Twin Towers, killing nearly 3,000 people. The nation watched in horror as the towers collapsed. The recovery effort, led by Mayor Rudy Giuliani and later Michael Bloomberg, demonstrated New York's toughness. The new One World Trade Center, completed in 2014, symbolized defiance. But the post-9/11 era also brought surveillance, militarized policing, and wars that stretched across 2 decades. The 2008 financial crisis, triggered partly by Wall Street's reckless mortgage-backed securities trading, devastated the global economy. Yet New York's financial sector survived and thrived, even as anger at banker bailouts fueled the Occupy Wall Street movement of 2011. Hurricane Sandy in 2012 flooded subways and devastated coastal neighborhoods, exposing infrastructure vulnerabilities. The COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 hit New York first and hardest in America. Hospitals overwhelmed, morgues overflowing, the city locked down. Over 30,000 New Yorkers died in the first wave alone. Frontline workers, disproportionately immigrants and people of color, kept the city alive. The pandemic exposed and exacerbated inequalities but also demonstrated solidarity and sacrifice. Today, New York remains America's largest city and most influential cultural capital. Its population exceeds 8 million in the city, 20 million in the metropolitan area. It is majority non-white, with nearly 40% foreign-born. Spanish, Chinese, Russian, and Yiddish echo through neighborhoods. Wall Street still dominates global finance. Broadway, though challenged by streaming services, remains live theater's apex. Hip-hop, born in the Bronx in the 1970s, became global culture. New York's universities, Columbia, NYU, Cornell's New York campus, are intellectual powerhouses. The city's problems, income inequality, housing affordability, aging infrastructure, climate vulnerability, are immense, yet its dynamism endures. From Haudenosaunee longhouses to Dutch trading posts, to British colonial capital, to American metropolis to global city, New York has reinvented itself repeatedly. Its history is not a steady march, but a turbulent, contentious, creative struggle. A story of ambition, exploitation, resistance, and renewal. The Empire State saga continues, written daily by millions whose ambitions, conflicts, and dreams shape the future as profoundly as their predecessors shaped the past.